today we've got Alex Yakyma. We're going to talk about a new book that he's written called Pursuing Enterprise Outcomes. And so, Alex, I was looking at your profile on LinkedIn, and it looks like you've got a pretty cool background, man. Do you just want to spend a second kind of introducing yourself, where you're from, and some of the experiences you've had?
Sure. So my background originally is in software development. So surprise, surprise, right? I worked as a software development for quite a while, and then as a project manager and program manager in different multicultural setups. Also, what you're hearing, guys, is no text and accent. I'm native Ukrainian, so hopefully what we'll learn today is a little bit about outcomes and Ukrainian accent. So happy to help with that. I then probably around 2009, 2010 started operating as a consultant, as a main way of operating, and mainly on different in different locations such as India, South Korea, some European countries, etc. And finally moved to the United States. So I worked with Skilled Agile for quite a while. I was on the core framework team till year 2016. And since then, I'm basically operating as an independent consultant and coach. I authored 2 books. One of them is The Rollout. That was basically more of a practical guide on rolling out safe implementations. And the new book is, as a matter of fact, is here, Pursuing Enterprise Outcomes. And that's what we're going to talk about today.
Very cool. So I guess that time in Boulder that you spent was there working with SAFE. And I'm imagining you learned a whole lot. Tell me a little bit about what led you to that career, especially out of the Ukraine, and how you connected with those guys. And
so that was that was interesting. I actually met Dean Leffingwell back in 2006, but under completely different circumstances. I was moving from one job to another as a software professional, and Dean was looking to outsource his new software project to Ukraine. And we just met in the job interview, and I was his scrum master at the time. He was my product owner. We were building a pretty sophisticated system together. And that's how we started working on different things. That after that project, it morphed more in collaboration around methods, and that's how we ended up working on SAFE together. So that was an amazing journey. Actually, I absolutely admired it. Overall, it's a great foundation. And at certain point, I certainly started exploring a broader set of options in terms of how to help organizations achieve good results at large scale. But it was absolutely great times that we had together, and working towards those interesting transformations and milestones for SAFE itself. That was amazing.
yeah, man, that's very cool. So you were at the epicenter of the birth of SAFE. That's pretty interesting there.
Yeah, that
Very cool.
was fun.
Yeah, sweet. So 2 books, and I'm just curious again, how does a person write a book, man? That's pretty impressive accomplishment there. This isn't like a little ebook that's, let me put 3 blogs together and do a book. So this is your second one. Talk a little bit about what motivated that and how you got on that journey.
Yeah, so as the title suggests, it's about outcomes primarily, although it's not just about outcomes. And we will today touch on a couple of topics. Actually, some of them will pertain directly to chapter 1, slightly to chapter 2. We will hit a little bit more on chapter 3 and chapter 5, which is business value and assessing business value, a little bit on chapter 4, which is empirical evidence and probing. And that's it for today. But actually, overall, I've been noticing this picture over and over again, working with various companies in a capacity of a consultant and coach, that a lot of attention is paid to the mechanics of software development and delivery, and not so much to actually what happens after. What does that software, hardware, or whatever else enables? And oftentimes, what it enables is not that much, sometimes zero, being dumped by the customer, etc., or misused or used to a very marginal benefit. And it basically made me wonder what leads to that and how that could be improved, because ultimately we're not in a business of software development, we're in a business of enabling those customers, right, that are actually using software to work, to perform the function at a bank, at an insurance company, and at you name it, right? So something was missing, some huge disconnect was apparent, and that's what I decided needed a lot more attention than it received so far. But lately, I have to say, I'm seeing this theme reappear by some other authors and thought leaders. More attention to outcomes, that's a good sign. That means that as an industry, we're moving a little bit, tipping towards that understanding, which is great. But it's still a journey to go. So, and here's the most interesting and exciting fact: we here are the ones who can help this. Each one of us in our own workplace, taking on those specific small, medium, large initiatives that we are a part of, asking questions. Why do we deliver what we deliver? Why it is done the way it is done? And what's going to happen on the receiving end? What is going to enable, right? So those are the right questions to start with. So the book is about that. The question in terms of how do you write a book, the short answer is very, very carefully. Okay.
Right. Yeah.
And with this one, it was interesting because I was hitting the brick wall many times because of the novelty of the content. This wasn't just some specific method that was out there for a very long time, just slightly reformulated. This was a lot of new experiences that I had within the last 2 to 3 years. So I didn't have a chance to have a really big and broad set of opportunities to write it, rewrite it, restate it in a different way. And the book was that first opportunity to properly do that. So that's why it was really hard. So it took 11 months actually
And that's
altogether.
great. I think your subject matter, you're spot on. So many of the customers I work with, will come in, hey, we want to start doing agile. We want to do, pick a scaling methodology. And as you dig into that, it's like, okay, well, I can help you do that, but what do you want to get out of it? What are you really moving towards? What's the driving factor? And let's start to track that. And I don't know why, but it seems like that's always second thought, not first thought. And I'm like, that needs to be your first thought, is where you're going with that. So certainly resonates with me, the theme there. I can definitely see a big need for it.
Yeah.
So yeah, with that said, you want to just kind of walk us through the
Absolutely.
Great.
Absolutely. Okay. So the plan for today, guys, would be this. We'll talk first about discovering crucial connections and disconnects, which are happening pretty common in complex enterprises. We'll talk about identifying outcomes and outcome chains. This will be our primary tool throughout this deck. We'll then briefly discuss how to capture business value. This is a truly important topic, often approached in a very generic, uh, common approach, not necessarily context dependent. So we'll try to close that gap today. And finally, assessing and adjusting solution trajectory. So today I'll try to get through that quite effectively so that we have Q&A at the end. Taking action will be a little portion after each section. And that will be just some suggestion for you to consider to perform as an potential action item. after the presentation. Okay, so and that has a very simple motivation behind it. um, that's because the only knowledge that matters is the knowledge that can be put to work. So let's try to make that happen together. So discovering crucial connections and disconnects. Here's a very simple example. Two people working together in something. Maybe it's a marketing campaign they work together on. Maybe it's a software feature. Let's say it's a software feature they work together on, right? um, they work in the same building, or maybe not in the same building these days, right? With COVID, they work at least in the same time zone. They can share a screen with each other at any point in time. They can work together effectively. Something happens though. We're changing some parameters in this collaboration. Imagine now that instead of them being basically co-located, being able to easily ask and answer questions, share a screen, show each other a quick increment of their effort, they are not, because of the time zone introduced to the process. So let's say this is one of those inconvenient time zone differences where they have like 10 or so hours difference, or 11 hours difference. What happens is it introduces a disconnect. Now, there's no ability to quickly validate assumptions with one another. Now we cannot easily look at each other's screen. Actually, we don't have pretty much any overlap times. So all we can have is after the day ends on one end, some notes are being sent to the other person. That's how they start their next day, and so on, and the cycle continues. Gradually they begin to accumulate various disconnects that result in rework, and it basically consumes quite a bit of their useful capacity. Now there's less. We may think that we can redistribute people the way we want across the globe. It's not exactly working to our advantage, especially if there's substantial dependencies between them. Okay, let's keep changing parameters just to see where it gets us, right? And assume there's another disconnect. These guys over time developed a personal conflict. So now they talk to each other only when it's really, really necessary, which introduces another set of problems. They basically can't even properly discuss things over the email because they're avoiding each other, avoiding communication with one another. This adds even more disconnect in the form of additional chunk of wasted capacity, and so on. There can be something else, right? Let's say these two guys have a very distinctive expertise background, which sometimes may be useful, but in their case, they basically speak different languages in terms of technology and understanding of the business. So that leads to even more rework, unnecessary problems with how they develop that shared feature, leading to only more disconnects. Now, if you look at this overall picture of capacity, it suddenly doesn't look all that good, does it? You got less than a half of useful capacity. Where's the rest of it? Well, it falls through the cracks of these disconnects. And this happens in enterprises at an incredible rate. The actual capacities that could be directly put to value creation are very, very tiny sometimes. Even more so, Brenda and Jaden are not alone in their enterprise. They are connected to other people. There's the whole group we can call the customer group, which has customer representative who actually brings requirements to Brenda and Jaden through product owner, who basically does not necessarily know the business so well and does not spend enough time with the teams either. So yet additional disconnect in their case. And the customer representative is quite disconnected from the end user, which is quite common. So all of these disconnects just basically absolutely diminish the actual useful capacity, and this is a pretty dire situation. Now, all of this that we talked about is to try to embrace this concept of disconnects as the primary type of bottleneck in a complex enterprise, right? Our problem is not that we cannot apply the effort, or that we don't have enough FTEs, if you will, or that we don't have enough time for those people that are involved in a particular initiative. In a complex system, it's the connections that matter more than the nodes themselves. And when the connections are broken, everything goes stale, and we are basically losing productivity as an organization as a whole. Moreover, whenever you have multiple disconnects in the system, they tend to reinforce one another. And that's actually quite easy to see in reality when, let's say, people who bring you the requirements may define them incorrectly, but then if you also implemented them incorrectly and delivered to the end user, who is unhappy with them, right? But the end user is not unhappy with your implementation. They're unhappy with what has been delivered, defined and delivered in the first place. And they say, hey, we're unhappy, but this person here concludes that it was just a poor implementation of their absolutely marvelous requirements. And now they want a fixing of that, and this vicious cycle keeps iterating over and over again, right? So this is how disconnects may layer on top of each other, creating a lot of problem and a lot of waste, both in time, effort, and enterprises' economic resources.
That's really
So
powerful. I just want to repeat that back. A lot of times we point the finger at the person did it wrong. Jaden, what'd you do, man? You developed the wrong thing. But it's
yeah.
it's really those interconnections that are the root cause on that, or lack of interconnections on that.
Yeah, I actually used to refer to this as follows. It's the systemic disconnects that prevent the organization from seeing systemic disconnects. That's another problem, right? We don't see them because we have them, and they prevent us from seeing things in the first place. So, and that's why they basically pile up in such a vicious cycle. So for some of us, maybe it's time to look into them, and that's our first little chunk of homework. Please consider this. What disconnects are negatively impacting the performance of your group? Try to identify them. Try to build some sort of an interaction map like those that I had here, because those help communicate the intent to those other professionals that you're involved with. Okay, next, identifying outcomes and outcome chains. This will be our primary tool. We know, even if not explicitly, then at least we keep that somewhere in the back of our mind, that the key to understanding value is the outcome of the assets that we develop and deliver. A new customer portal is only as good and useful as the improved self-service for appointment scheduling that it is supposed to enable. And if it doesn't do that, then basically none of it makes any sense whatsoever. It's just a miss. It's still software. It can be great software in the sense that it's nearly defect free and so amazing to look at, yada yada yada, but it doesn't do the main thing, then it's too bad, right? Same for, let's say, a navigation system upgrade that we're creating. There's a purpose for that too: improved navigation and limited visibility. If it doesn't do that, doesn't matter how great it looks, how much time we spent creating it, it's all waste. Just maybe sometimes very expensive waste, but it's all there is, right? A new neural network learning algorithm in this case makes sense only when it provides better support for mission control decisions, right? A new customer service representative repository for faster and better customer service. If that doesn't happen, we're in trouble. So we see the pattern here, right? We have something on the left, which we call outputs of our work, and something on the right, which is the outcome. And when the two are disconnected from one another, and this is that most vicious type of disconnect, bad things happen. Bad things because we are basically wasting money at a super high rate. We may even collaborate well. We may even understand each other so well. But all of us are in a weird bubble where we believe we create something of value, but it's actually not going to serve its purpose, and we don't even know that usually. So that's something that we have to learn how to fix. So let's do this. Okay, let's pick an example. In our case, let's take this one, the last one, the CSR repository that we're going to. All right, so here's the simple example. Okay, let's consider that CSR repository. That's the output, right? We'll put it at the beginning of that thing that we're gonna call the outcome chain, right? We're gonna ask ourselves a simple question. So we have CSR repository, or at least we intend to build one. What for? That's the first most important question. Well, we do that so as to, as a CSR, could find answers faster. That's that simple, right? But that's probably not enough. So we continue to ask this question. And what is that for? Well, so as to, as a customer, I can get my issue resolved faster. That is also not it. That is done so as to more customers could be served. And we can continue on and on, right? Up until we get to some fundamental financial indicators, for instance, for that enterprise. This is an example of an outcome chain. In some sense, it validates the outputs, but it also validates outcomes because it connects each outcome to the higher order one. And it brings some meaning to it. Disconnects may happen not only between the output and its immediate outcome, it may happen between, let's say, first and second order outcomes. So I may be able to find answers faster as a CSR with the help of this repository, but maybe I'm finding the wrong answers fast, right? So I'm still not serving the next order outcome, or maybe I do, but what happens is that I'm mostly solving the symptoms of the customer problem. So I cannot serve more customers altogether because these customers will be coming back and they will be particularly angry, which introduces us to a collateral outcome, as we call it, in this case, lower customer satisfaction. And now we may figure out, hold on a second, maybe there are some issues that no matter how we serve the customer on those, they will be unhappy no matter what. So maybe our solution is incomplete. Maybe we're missing another system here, something akin to issue router or tracker that would connect CSRs to other professionals within the enterprise, such as people from the shipment and others who have the expertise these guys don't, and therefore would enable them to change that collateral outcome to something better. So this is a simple example of how an outcome chain can reveal some interesting missed intricacies of the specific context and drive us towards better solutions. So generally speaking, in terms of terminology, the outcome chain usually has a structure like this. What's on the left side is the output, everything else is outcomes, starting with the immediate outcome, and the rest are higher order ones, ending with what we call the ultimate outcome. Now, outcome chains are very convenient tools to communicate the intent, especially to the higher order stakeholders, and have meaningful conversations with them. But it's also very helpful for teams to know what they contribute to. It adds ultimate meaning to what they do. We're not creating a CSR repository to just have a CSR repository, and not even just to provide for the CSRs to find answers faster. We have a deeper, more meaningful, more important story to tell, and that story has to be told to your teams. And maybe that's you who will do that. So here's a question to consider after this presentation. What outcomes is your group after? And are they explicitly known and pursued? Either way, try to simply defining them, and try to do that in a form of an outcome narrative. I cheated here a little bit, so I sometimes do that, but I'll promise not to do that again today. Here in the outcome chain, we had this shorthand reference, I find answers faster. This actually blows out into a deeper outcome narrative. So that's something that would be useful for you to try, and try to do that in a first person voice. I, as a CSR, try to develop that empathy with the people who are directly affected by the outputs of your work. That's how you arrive at the right understanding of the outcomes. Okay, so that's for the exercise. Value. A lot of discussions are around business value, and it's natural. Companies want to know what's the return on the invested time, effort, money. So to answer that question, one of the ways is this, and we'll try to basically put this question in a specific form of making an economic choice between two chunks of work for our solution: fuzzy search and advanced error reporting. Um, and that's basically, again, for the CSR repository. I slightly stripped off this whole outcome chain of all the iconography, just keeping the main things here, the main nodes, and I added this last node, which is the financial indicator. We do all this ultimately to increase revenue, because more customers are served, more problems solved, they purchase more of our products, so everyone is happy, and we earn some of financial benefit from that as a company. Totally reasonable. Now, the question is how to assess value of these two chunks of work. Let's say these are significant features, big features. One way to think about it is, let's try assigning some financial value to it. But here's the problem. These features live here all the way at the end on this left side of the outcome chain. And there's quite a distance to the financial indicators. Basically trying to express something this far away from revenue in a monetary expression would be just an exercise in creative writing. So instead of that, what we're going to do is we're going to limit our scope for now to just this initial portion of the outcome chain. And we'll keep in mind the rest of it for validation purposes, but just limit the conversation to this. And we'll assume that these features are same size, so that it's just easy to make a choice between the two based on their business value. If they are not the same size, we just divide them by size in each case and to normalize, and we'll get to the same story again. So that's that. Let's try to do this. So we're expanding on that first link in the outcome chain with the output and its immediate outcome. The connector is the most important thing, as we said, right, before. But let's think of that connector not as a single wire, but rather as a cable that contains multiple wires underneath. So understanding what wires it consists of will help us reveal the actual structure of value in this case. So in our example, it's CSR repository, the output, and CSR being able to find answers faster as an outcome. The way we're going to approach this is simple. We're going to start asking a simple question. How does the value manifest itself? And this is what the product team, for instance, will be trying to figure out. First, what they found is for these features, one way to achieve value, or the way the value can be manifested, is through improved inclusion of some of the CSR repository content that otherwise would not be available to the CSRs. So we got ourselves what we call a first value path, that first wire. We call them value paths. Okay, it's just simply a path or a way through which value realizes itself. Very simple. And it's called inclusion in our case. Again, it's contextual, very important that it's contextual. It matters to this particular context. The next one they figured is better relevance of the results that are returned to the CSRs. So the next value path is relevance. And yet the next is improved quality of an article. Boom, there you go, right? Now what we try to do is basically define what we call importance scores. We're going to ask this question. How important is inclusion of the results to being able to find answers faster for the CSR? Or how important is the relevance of those search results to being able to find answers faster? How important is the quality of an article to being able to find answers faster? And we'll ask this product team to define those in absolutely relative terms. And that's what they do. Let's say 3, 5, and 2. And that only means that this guy, for instance, is 2.5 times as impactful as this one. to this outcome, right? So roughly speaking, that's all it means. So we got those, we will call the importance scores. Now, we're gonna do this. We're gonna basically go back and plug in each one of these features here and try to see, given that this is what we need on the right side, we're going to see what capability does every feature have in satisfying this demand on the right. So we'll do this for the first one, fuzzy search. Okay, and let's say the product team figured that it's 5, 1, and 0. And this means that, for instance, they believe that fuzzy search has nothing to do with changing quality of articles. And that's reasonable. Search is not going to change the quality of articles. Search can only find articles, but not improve their quality, for instance, right? Very little on the relevance and a lot on inclusion, which is understandable. That's what fuzzy search actually stands for. It brings in some results that otherwise would not be included in that. We do basically this, and then it's very easy to see how to assess value down each value path. You have to simply multiply this by this, this by this. It's very easy, right? To get value down each value path, and then just aggregate them, add them up. Hence the formula. Very simple. We got our expression for total value for this feature. We do the same exact thing for the other one. Our importance scores will stay the same, obviously, because they only depend on the outcome itself, but our capability scores are going to be different for this outcome for obvious reasons. Same logic as before, we got a different number. So now we can answer the question, basically. If these two features were competing for a limited team's capacity, it will be this one that wins to be the right to be developed next. So far, so good. A little request for you guys, consider this question. Where do you see the lack of understanding of value in those organizations you work with? And try to facilitate value discovery process to help your teams focus on what really matters. Okay, lastly, assessing and adjusting the solution trajectory. So we had all these conversations about outcomes and outcome chains and value that we deliver through this process. And of course, in the book, you'll see a lot more methods, because this is one of the simplest ones and works only in simpler cases. But here's the big question. Are the assumptions correct? Are the outcomes that we intended and expressed in that outcome chain, do they make sense? We do some validation in agile methods, by the way. There are some legitimized ones, such as demos, right? There's a danger that comes with them too, because what we often tend to be doing is we're basically validating our ability to create outputs, and that often is it, unfortunately, right? And that creates a big disconnect with the rest of the outcome chain. Why? Because let's say we built something in two to 4 weeks. We decided to show it to who? Maybe to product owner, product manager. Well, but they will not be using it, right? So and it happens quite often that when this is delivered to the end customer, suddenly it's all bad. Suddenly it's not working properly. Why? Well, that's exactly why, because we had a disconnect with validating the actual outcomes. We're basically probed only for the output creation, and we've proven that we can create outputs. Those may be wrong outputs, but we just proved that we can create them. You may say, okay, so why don't we just invite a CSR, in this case, to the demo? This is interesting, and it may certainly reveal more. But there are some other factors that are also very impactful, like the need to use that software. So this is a very common situation when you invite an end user to your demo, and they like it, and they try to stay very positive about that and encourage you to do more, and everyone is happy. 2.5 months later, when you actually delivered it to them, let's say to those accountants, and now is the time for them to prepare those quarterly reports, and they really care about that. Now suddenly they discover that most of your functionality is unfit for purpose, right? And this is not because they were mean or they tried to deceive you on purpose. This is because they just couldn't care enough at the demo. They wanted to, but they can't because the context, the real need was missing, right? So you again have a surrogate feedback. And if you're guided mostly by that, that's a problem. So some other type of probing is needed, more effective than that. And in order to understand that, we need to comprehend the full system. This is the first step in the situation. We often associate the system with the software we deliver. That's an overly narrow view. In our case, for instance, the CSR repository is only one component of the system. The others are the CSRs themselves, which is the direct users, the immediate users, the customers whom they are helping with this CSR repository, the actual workflows that they execute, and the need that they have in serving the customer. And the customer actually has the need to resolve their issues. Now it looks more complete. So what matters is that, yeah, these components are interconnected in some peculiar way. And we may not know exactly how they are interconnected. What are those intricacies that bind them together? But that's why probing is needed. Probing is action that will help us reveal those interconnections between the components of the system. So that's what we're going to do. And the two primary approaches to probing are what we call direct and indirect methods. And this distinction is based on whether or not we're trying to approximate the end picture, the end result that we want to build, or we try to somehow take a different angle and approach it from that. So it will be more understandable if I show you that on an example. So the direct one, how are we going to do this? So one of the ways to absolutely surely probe this, the full system is if we delivered a complete CSR repository here, completely, everything, gave it to all CSRs, have them serve all the customers, executing all possible workflows and being in the context of the actual real need. You would certainly learn what's working, what's not working, right? But that's also a little bit too late because you already spent all the effort, money, and time in developing your CSR repository. So question is, can we do that more productively and learn earlier while we still can make some decisions to change, right? Okay, a subset everywhere is one possible solution, right? We develop and deliver some of the CSR repository functionality to some CSRs, to some who will serve some customers. There will be only a subset of workflows that will be supported by this. And of course, the need for those will be a subset of the whole thing. So essentially, what we're doing is we're creating a thin slice across the entire whole ecosystem. And this is showing immediately where there's a problem with how we typically validate in Agile. Instead of having a slice across the whole board, we only increment here over and over and over. These, no, we're not going to touch those. Why would we touch on those, right? Let's keep guessing. And as a result of that, this is basically a self-deception system, because all we prove is that we can write software. That's all, right? Whether that software is creating the right impact, we have no idea. And that's because we did not understand the full system and did not approximate the full system. Now, indirect probing sometimes is more useful, or could be used in conjunction with approximation-based or direct probing. And it works basically otherwise, at least for some components. So instead of implementing all the functionality as a part of the CSR repository, we will use some of them simply in Excel spreadsheets and other additional documents. And that's just to have the utmost flexibility in creating whatever we want, just for the sake of that experiment, right? And instead of giving it to CSRs, for instance, we will give it to people from the shipment department and from other groups in the company. Why would we do such a weird thing? Well, here's why. It may turn out that people from the shipment department serve customers' issues much better if those customer issues arise from problems with shipments, for instance, which may reveal to us, for example, that CSRs substantially lack expertise in shipment and other functions of the enterprise. And maybe they need a training, maybe some other enablers are needed. See, these are the things that you can only usually reveal through indirect probing. And one example is what we call a substitution method. So more on that in the book, of course, but you got the idea, right? You are seeking a different angle at the same picture instead of trying to just bluntly increment towards the desired end goal. Now, why do we care about this? Because there's a question, like let's say if we have that feature that we were just discussing, advanced error reporting, how about these numbers? Do they even make sense? Is this really 5? Is this the most important thing to our outcome? That was our hypothesis, of course, but who said it's true? It's true only when it's empirically validated. And if we do a decent extent of probing, all of this may pop out, and it may turn out, for instance, that relevance of search result does not impact the outcome pretty much at all. And it's all about the quality of pages, for instance, and that's where the effort has to go, right? So those are all important things because they ultimately influence the total value that we intend to deliver. So we basically probe to learn better about these things. So the last thing I'll ask you to do is, what's probing missing in your outcome chain? And try to instill some simple probing scenarios in the existing process, maybe in the way you plan, execute, and review the results of your work today. Don't necessarily invent new meetings, new ceremonies. Just try to inject them in the existing ones and see if you could plan out a couple of experiments like that. Lastly, a big missing important role that is not necessarily something new that has to be introduced. Outcome ownership can be a logical and very much needed extension to existing roles, maybe of a product owner or product manager or some level stakeholder. But without this, we have a lot of people in the organization who own and are overly attached to the outputs of work to the detriment of the outcomes delivered. So this is something maybe that you would step into, or you know who should, and you could help them now that you know more. And with that, glorious questions. Yay.
Alex, man, thank you so much. My brain's going 100 miles an hour thinking about different ways I can apply this in the real world, maybe starting later this afternoon. So really appreciate that. Yeah, I saw a couple questions come in on the chat, but you guys feel free to unmute and ask your question if you'd like to do that. Let me see here if I can pull up some of those from the chat real quick. Brian, you were asking, would the outcome depend on who the end user is?
Oh yeah, and you may have actually a number of outcomes. That's a great question. So thank you for that. An outcome chain is a somewhat idealized picture, right? When you have this whole picture, something feeding into something, and it looks like a linear chain. As a matter of fact, it may look like something like this, where you have different outcomes for different personas. It's very natural. As a matter of fact, that's where the outcome research begins. Is like, who would the outputs of my work influence or impact, right? And we identified those various personas, and then for each one we would have that empathy exercise, trying to understand, okay, I'm that person, right? What do I see or what do I experience? It's like, close your eyes, imagine yourself, you're that persona, and go. So absolutely, good question. Moreover, each one usually deserves a full-blown, highly detailed outcome narrative. So yeah, thanks for thinking in that direction. That's very encouraging to hear.
Hey, now, I had just another question follow-up. I'm really intrigued by the idea of an outcome owner. I think that's a really powerful position. Would you envision that as someone like a product owner or product manager that sits as a surrogate for the actual person, or do you actually pull in those personas at the various nodes to play that role?
Yeah, so I would say that a PO and PM can totally play the role, but it should not be attached unilaterally to them or always indiscriminately decided that way, because in some cases outcome ownership is a little bit more sophisticated. It can be a shared function across multiple stakeholders who have exposure to different personas indeed. In some complicated cases, you may have different outcome owners along the outcome chain at different nodes. Oh, and by the way, hey guys, you probably know this already, that in your organization, most likely there's always an outcome owner already. And that's the problem, is that they are the very high level of the almost ultimate outcomes. And those are typically people with P&L responsibility. The issue is that they are way too far from what we create. So unfortunately, by design, they cannot attend the immediate outcomes of our effort, right? So this is the tier where attention is needed. So yes, absolutely, POs can play that role. But then again, an outcome owner has to have some enablement, has to seek some enablement. The outcome owner cannot be overly attached to the outputs that they create. They have to optimize outputs, sometimes all the way to drastically redefining them, all to serve better outcomes of their efforts. So, and of course, guys, the real life situations are much more sophisticated. You're operating, I'm sure, under multiple different constraints. Try to just instill that conversation first. Try to, even for your product owner, to start thinking differently and have them extend their role to the role of the outcome owner, and see where it gets you. It's a very tough role to play, though, but it's a way to manifest true leadership in your environment. So yeah, please do.
That's great. Hey, very much appreciate your time. I know we're right up against our time box. What I was curious on, so definitely a lot of stuff to spark thought here, and I can easily see where I'd want to do a lot more reading, research on that. So your book, I'm sure, includes a lot more. This is just kind of like the first little sip of that. If people want to get a hold of your book, what's the best way to do that?
Amazon.
Perfect. Just look it up there. Awesome. Good deal. Well, I'll definitely do that. And then as far as folks getting in touch with you, is LinkedIn the best option for you, or do you have a website that you want to share?
So yeah, I do have a website. It's orgmindset.com, but the best way to contact me is just LinkedIn. Knock on the door. You're always welcome. I'll be happy to add you to my network if you're not there yet, and just write me a message. Alternatively, can just go to and you can just email me. I added the email to the first slide here. I will also provide you guys with the PDF version of this deck, so you can have it for download for the group. Use it if you need to. So we basically answered all questions so far.
I think so. Are there any
Okay.
fun ones? Brian had one more. So for value outcomes for those presenting the PO, the features would be different from the end user values, the stakeholders. Yep. I think he was making a statement there. Yep.
Okay. Yeah. Well, actually, yeah, the overall assessment of value is also subservient to that whole thought that we just discussed at the very end of this conversation. Hold on, where are we? That thing, right? If you have multiple outcomes, you may have multiple value paths within each. So the scoring will have to happen along the lines of those paths that now are hitting on multiple outcomes. It's the same logic, it's just more complicated picture. It may look something as this, for instance, right?
Right. Yep.
So.
Great. Yeah, I think that wraps up the questions that we had, and I saw through the chat, everybody was really thankful for your time. Very interesting presentation.
Well, it's my pleasure, guys. Thanks for joining us today. And hey, push hard in your organizational environment towards the outcomes, because that's the leadership type that we are missing today. We're talking a lot about different types of leadership. We're omitting the most important ones. It's in complex environments. It's not a given. Outcomes are not automatically achieved as a result of creating outputs. So lead your organizations to a better future with this.
Appreciate that. Thanks so much, Alex. Look forward to staying in touch, and definitely continue this conversation as we go.